When they abandoned me at 8, my grandparents gave me everything. At 28, my parents returned for my $3 million inheritance. My name is Morgan, and at 28, I never imagined I'd be standing in a lawyer's office, protecting a $3 million inheritance from the two people who were supposed to protect me. My grandparents raised me after my parents walked away when I was 8 years old, giving me everything they never could: love, security, and a sense of worth. When my grandmother died 6 months after I finished grad school, I did exactly what she'd asked. I moved everything into an irrevocable trust. 2 weeks ago, my parents showed up at my doorstep in Philadelphia with gift bags and nervous smiles, and suddenly I was 8 years old again, waiting by a window that nobody ever came back to. If you've ever had to guard what's rightfully yours against people who should have been guarding you, drop a comment and hit subscribe, because what happened next taught me everything about the difference between family and relatives. I was 5 when things started falling apart, though I didn't have words for it then. My earliest memories aren't birthday parties or trips to the park. They're of my mother's mood swings and my father's disappearing acts. Our apartment in Newark always smelled weird, this mix of cigarette smoke and something chemical that I later realized was whatever my mom was using that week. My dad, Raymond, called himself an entrepreneur, but mostly he was unemployed. My mom, Courtney, said she was getting her real estate license, but her study sessions happened at bars and ended with her coming home either screaming with excitement or not coming home at all. My brother Devin was 4 years older, and he became my everything. He'd make us ramen when there wasn't anything else to eat, and he'd distract me during the fights by teaching me card tricks he learned from YouTube. He developed this system. He'd check our parents' pupils when they came home, and if something looked off, we'd grab our backpacks and hide in the laundry room of our apartment building until things quieted down. The day everything changed started normal, which is maybe the scariest part. I was 8, and it was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays meant pizza day at school, and I'd been looking forward to it all week. But when I got home, both parents were there, which almost never happened. They weren't fighting. They were packing. Family adventure, my mom announced, her voice too bright, too sharp. You're going to stay with Grandma and Grandpa for a little bit while Dad and I handle some business stuff. We'd only met my dad's parents maybe 3 times. They lived in this beautiful house in Princeton, and the visits were always tense. Lots of whispered arguments between my dad and grandfather in the hallway, my grandmother's tight smiles. I found out later they'd been trying to get custody of us for years, that they'd offered to pay for rehab, for therapy, for anything. My dad had refused every time. They packed our clothes in trash bags, not even suitcases, and promised they'd be back in 2 weeks. Devin didn't believe them. I could see it in his face during that long, silent car ride to Princeton. He was 12 and already understood things I was too young to grasp. My grandfather, William, met us at the door. He was this tall man with silver hair and kind eyes that looked sad when they landed on us. My grandmother, Dorothy, had this way of moving that made everything seem graceful. She hugged us like she'd been waiting her whole life to do it, and maybe she had. The house smelled like vanilla and lemon polish, and they'd already set up 2 bedrooms with fresh sheets and stuffed animals still in their packaging. Looking back now, they'd been preparing for this day. They knew it was coming. 2 weeks became 3, then 4. My parents' phones were disconnected. The social worker who showed up explained in careful language that my mom and dad had relocated and weren't responding to attempts at contact. My grandparents filed for emergency guardianship that same afternoon. But Devin shocked everyone. "I'm going to live with Coach Martinez," he announced. His baseball coach and his wife had apparently agreed to take him in. I was devastated. First my parents left, now my brother? But years later, Devin explained it. He couldn't do another family situation, couldn't risk getting attached and being abandoned again. He needed a completely different environment, something that wasn't trying to replace what we'd lost. The guardianship took months to finalize. During that time, I overheard bits and pieces. My dad had gambling debts, my mom had skipped court dates, there were warrants. Every couple months, we'd get a random phone call. "Hey, sweetheart, we're getting everything sorted out. We'll come get you soon." The calls got less frequent, the promises more vague, until eventually they just stopped. Meanwhile, my grandparents built me a life. Grandma Dorothy taught me to knit and how to identify birds in the backyard. Grandpa William helped me with fractions and took me to Phillies games on Saturday afternoons. They came to every school concert, every parent-teacher conference, every swim meet. They didn't try to make me call them Mom and Dad, they just loved me consistently, which was something I'd never experienced before. They weren't flashy with their money. Grandpa had owned a chain of regional pharmacies that he'd sold to CVS back in the 90s, investing everything carefully. They drove a 10-year-old Camry and clipped coupons, but they had season tickets to the Philadelphia Orchestra and donated quietly to causes they believed in. Money is security, Grandpa told me once while teaching me about compound interest. It's not about buying stuff, it's about having choices when life gets hard. By the time I was a teenager, the occasional calls from my parents felt like interruptions from strangers. Devin would check in sometimes, but he'd built his own life in Boston and seemed determined to leave our shared past behind. I understood, but I missed him. I missed the brother who'd protected me, even though I was grateful for the grandparents who were protecting me now. My grandparents became my real family, my template for what love actually looked like. But they also taught me to be careful, to watch for patterns in people's behavior, to trust but verify. These lessons felt abstract then. I didn't know how crucial they'd become. By 16, life in Princeton had become my normal. I'd stopped flinching when I heard raised voices, stopped hoarding snacks in my bedroom, stopped waiting for everything to fall apart. The beautiful colonial house with Grandma's garden and Grandpa's study full of leather-bound books, this was home now. My grandparents' wealth was quiet but substantial. That $3 million estate was the result of Grandpa's business sense and decades of careful investing. He'd sold his pharmacy chain at exactly the right moment, right before the big box stores dominated the market. They lived comfortably but not extravagantly. They believed in quality over quantity. Money gives you freedom, Grandpa would say over breakfast while reviewing the stock market reports. Not freedom to buy whatever you want, but freedom to make decisions based on what's right instead of what's desperate. This philosophy sank deep into my bones. I got a summer job at the local bookstore not because I needed the money, but because Grandpa believed everyone should understand what working for minimum wage felt like. School became my passion. Without the chaos of my early childhood, I actually had mental space to learn. I joined the debate team and discovered I was good at constructing arguments. I played piano and found I had a decent ear. My grades went from average to exceptional. My grandparents came to everything. Every debate tournament, every recital, every awards ceremony. Grandma would sit in the front row with her camera, and Grandpa would give me detailed feedback on my debate performances during the drive home. For the first time in my life, I felt like I mattered to someone. Contact with my biological parents shrank to nearly nothing. A birthday card would show up occasionally with no return address and some generic message about missing me. Devin graduated high school and immediately moved to Seattle for college, making it clear he wanted a fresh start with no connections to New Jersey or our past. When college application season arrived, my grandparents pushed me to aim high. I applied to Georgetown, Penn, Northwestern, schools I never would have considered without their encouragement and financial support. When the acceptance letter from Georgetown arrived, Grandma made my favorite lemon chicken, and Grandpa opened a bottle of champagne he'd been saving. For the moments that actually matter, he said, pouring me half a glass despite me being underage. This matters. I threw myself into college life in Washington, D.C. I majored in economics with a minor in public policy, joined the investment club, and landed competitive internships at financial firms during my summers. My professors commented on my unusual maturity, my practical understanding of financial concepts. They didn't know it came from years of breakfast table conversations about market dynamics and portfolio diversification. Everything was going according to plan. Then, during my junior year, Grandma started getting tired. Just little things at first, needing to sit down while gardening, choosing not to walk to the grocery store. Tests revealed stage 4 ovarian cancer that had already spread. The prognosis was poor, maybe a year with aggressive treatment, maybe less. I wanted to take the semester off to help, but both my grandparents refused absolutely. Your education is non-negotiable, Grandma insisted during a video call from her hospital bed. I need to know you're building your future while I'm dealing with this. That's what'll give me peace. We compromised. I stayed in school but came home every single weekend, taking the Amtrak from Union Station to Princeton Junction. Those 3-hour rides gave me time to study while still being present for her increasingly difficult treatments. Watching my elegant, vibrant grandmother diminish was heartbreaking, but she faced it with incredible grace. Life doesn't always give us what we want, sweetheart, she told me during one of our last real conversations. But it always gives us the chance to show who we really are. She made me promise 2 things, finish my degree, and always protect myself while keeping my heart open enough to love. I didn't fully understand the second part then. Grandma died during the spring semester of my senior year. I was 21. Grandpa, who'd been married to her for 52 years, seemed to age a decade overnight. I spent that entire summer at home, helping sort through her belongings and just keeping him company during those awful early months of grief. Despite his loss, Grandpa insisted I go back for my final year. "Dorothy would haunt me if I let you quit now," he said with a sad smile. We set up weekly video calls, and I came home once a month. But during those visits, I noticed his health declining too. The doctor said it was stress-related heart issues, but I knew better. He was dying of a broken heart. Through all of this, my parents remained completely absent. Not even a sympathy card after Grandma died. Devin sent flowers but couldn't get time off work for the funeral. The contrast between my grandparents' devotion and my parents' absence only made me more certain about who my real family was. I graduated summa cum laude with a job offer from a prestigious financial advisory firm in Philadelphia. Grandpa came to graduation despite his weakening heart, beaming with pride as I walked across that stage. "Your grandmother would be so incredibly proud," he whispered when I found him afterward. "You were the daughter of our hearts, Morgan. You know that, right?" I knew. And 2 weeks later, everything changed. We were sitting in Grandpa's study, surrounded by his collection of first edition books and family photos, when he brought up his estate planning. It was late May, 2 weeks after graduation, and the evening light was slanting through the windows in that particular way that makes everything look golden and temporary. "I need to talk to you about the future, Morgan," he said, his voice steady despite his frailty. "Dorothy and I made arrangements a long time ago. Everything goes to you, the house, the investments, all of it. You're our granddaughter in every way that matters." Then he told me something that made my blood run cold. "Your father has called me twice in the past month asking for money. Significant amounts, first 50,000, then 100. When I refused, he started making comments about his rights as my son, about how family takes care of family." Grandpa's expression hardened in a way I rarely saw. "I want you to be prepared, Morgan. When I'm gone, they'll come back." I didn't want to believe him. It seemed impossible that my parents would suddenly reappear after 20 years of nothing. I told myself Grandpa was being paranoid, that his grief over Grandma was making him anxious about things that wouldn't actually happen. But Grandpa, as he'd been about most things in life, was wiser than I wanted to acknowledge. His health deteriorated quickly over the next few months. The heart issues progressed to congestive heart failure requiring hospitalization, then home hospice care. I deferred my job start date and moved back into my childhood bedroom to take care of him. Those final months, our roles reversed completely. I managed his medications, coordinated with nurses, sat with him during long afternoons while he drifted between clarity and confusion. During his clear moments, he continued my education about money management, but now with desperate urgency. "People show their true nature when money's involved," he told me one evening while I was helping him review some documents. "Even family. Especially family, sometimes." He insisted on introducing me to his attorney, Richard Brennan, who started including me in discussions about the estate. That's when I learned the full scope of what my grandparents had built. The house in Princeton worth about $800,000, investment accounts, life insurance, savings. The total estate was approaching $3 million. "Your grandmother and I built this for you, Morgan," Grandpa said when he saw my shock at the numbers. "We always knew you'd use it wisely." One Tuesday in October, 6 months after graduation, I found Grandpa unresponsive during his afternoon nap. The hospice nurse arrived quickly but could only confirm what I already knew in my heart. He'd passed peacefully in his sleep, finally joining Grandma after 16 months apart. The funeral was small and dignified, exactly what he would have wanted. Devin flew in from Seattle this time, standing awkwardly beside me in a suit that didn't quite fit. My parents didn't show up, though I later learned they'd called the funeral home asking about the arrangements. The will reading happened in Richard Brennan's office in downtown Princeton, in a room with dark wood paneling and leather chairs. I sat alone on one side of his massive desk, a single beneficiary where there should have been a family. The terms were straightforward. I inherited everything. The house, the portfolio, the insurance policies, even Grandpa's coin collection and Grandma's jewelry that I'd always admired. Richard handed me an envelope after going through the legal documents. "William asked me to give you this privately," he explained, then left me alone to read it. The letter was in Grandpa's shaky handwriting from his final weeks. My dearest Morgan, if you're reading this, I've gone to be with Dorothy, which brings me peace even as I hate leaving you. You've been the greatest joy of our later years, and we couldn't be prouder of the woman you've become. This inheritance comes with responsibility. You have the intelligence to manage it and the heart to use it well. But I must warn you, your father has substantial debts and a pattern of financial chaos that continues to this day. I have reason to believe he and your mother will try to access these funds through you. Consider talking to Richard about establishing a trust. It would protect you and honor what Dorothy and I wanted for this legacy. Remember that money is just a tool. Your real inheritance is the strength and discernment we tried to nurture in you. Trust your instincts. They're excellent. All my love, Grandpa. I sat in that quiet office, tears streaming down my face, feeling both enormously blessed and suddenly very alone. The responsibility felt crushing, but underneath that was the fear Grandpa had named, the fear that my parents would come back now, after all these years, wanting something from me. Over the next 3 weeks, I focused on practical matters. I arranged for house maintenance while I decided whether to live there or sell it. I met with financial advisors Richard recommended to understand the investment portfolio. I sorted through personal belongings, a painful task that brought equal measures of grief and gratitude. Then I got an email from Devin. After years of minimal contact, he was suddenly interested in family business and wanted to visit soon to discuss our shared interests. The timing felt suspicious. He'd barely spoken to me in years, and now, right after the inheritance, he wanted to talk about family. Acting on instinct, I called Richard Brennan back. My grandfather mentioned possibly establishing a trust, I said. I want to understand what that would involve. Richard explained various options, ultimately recommending an irrevocable trust with specific terms. It would protect the assets from creditors or any potential claims, he said carefully. Once it's established, even you can't simply withdraw everything, which can actually be protective in certain situations. Like if someone was pressuring me for money. I asked directly. Richard's expression confirmed what I suspected. Exactly like that. Before making my final decision, I asked Richard to hire a private investigator to look into my parents' current situation. The report came back a week later, and it was worse than I'd imagined. My father had declared bankruptcy twice in the past 10 years. There were tax liens, defaulted loans, a lawsuit from investors in some failed cryptocurrency scheme. My mother had her own financial disasters, maxed credit cards, an eviction on her record, debt collectors calling constantly. Between them, they owed nearly $400,000. The investigator also found something else. Evidence that my parents had been tracking obituaries of wealthy individuals, specifically targeting those without many heirs. There were records of them contacting distant relatives of deceased people, trying to insert themselves into estate situations. In 2 cases, families had paid them to go away rather than deal with prolonged legal battles. This information, combined with Devin's sudden interest in Reconnect Ion, made my decision crystal clear. I established the irrevocable trust with Richard's help, structuring it to provide me with reasonable income while protecting the principal from claims or my own potential mistakes. The legal process took about 10 days. 4 days after the trust paperwork was finalized, I got a call from an unknown Florida number. Morgan? Honey, it's Dad. Your mom and I are actually in Philadelphia right now for business. We thought maybe it was time we all got together, as a family. Just like that. 20 years of silence. And now they were back. The timing couldn't have been more suspicious, or more fortunate, since the trust was already legally established and unbreakable. They wanted to come to the house on Friday evening at 6. I said yes, though every instinct I developed over 20 years of their absence was screaming at me to refuse. I spent the days before their visit preparing, not emotionally, but strategically. I reviewed the trust documents again with Richard, making sure I understood exactly what was and wasn't accessible. I tested the security system that Grandpa had installed a few years back, making sure the cameras were positioned correctly. I even did a practice run of what I'd say if they asked directly about money. Friday arrived. I dressed carefully, nice but not expensive looking, professional but not intimidating. I set the dining room table with Grandma's china, not because I was excited to see them, but because I needed her presence, her strength, to get through this. The doorbell rang at exactly 6 o'clock. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and opened the door. My father, Raymond, had aged badly. His face was puffy and lined, his nose covered with the broken blood vessels of someone who'd been drinking heavily for years. He was wearing a blazer that had seen better days, trying for respectability but missing the mark. My mother, Courtney, had maintained herself better. Blonde highlights in her hair, a dress that was probably meant to look sophisticated but somehow came across as trying too hard. She smelled like expensive perfume layered over cigarette smoke. Behind them stood Devin, now 32 and almost unrecognizable from the protective 12-year-old I remembered. His face was harder, more calculating. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Morgan. My mother lunged forward to hug me like we'd seen each other last week instead of 2 decades ago. Look at you, all grown up and gorgeous. My father hung back, assessing the house behind me with undisguised interest. Hey, kiddo, he said, using a nickname he'd never actually used when I was a child. Been way too long. Devin just nodded. Morgan. I led them to the dining room, where I'd prepared a simple dinner: roasted chicken, vegetables, nothing fancy. My mother gushed over everything, her eyes cataloguing the furniture, the artwork, the silver candlesticks Grandma had collected. What a beautiful home, she said. William and Dorothy always did have excellent taste. Yes, I replied simply. They made it wonderful. A flicker of something, guilt? Anger? Crossed my father's face at this reminder, but he quickly covered it with a smile. Well, we're just glad to finally be here. You know, water under the bridge and all that. Family's family, right? Dinner was excruciating. They asked surface-level questions about my life. Where did I go to college? What was I doing for work? Nodding with exaggerated interest at my brief answers. I provided minimal information while observing them carefully. My mother dominated the conversation with long stories about their life, none of which I'd been part of. My father kept steering things toward financial topics with all the subtlety of a bulldozer. So I heard William did pretty well when he sold those pharmacies, he said while cutting his chicken. Smart guy, my father. Always thinking ahead. Yes, I answered carefully. He was very successful. Must have left a pretty solid inheritance, he continued, his casual tone betrayed by the intensity in his eyes. For the family, I mean. Devin suddenly spoke up. Dad, maybe ease up a bit. My father shot him an irritated look but forced a laugh. Just catching up, that's all. A father can be interested in his daughter's life, can't he? My mother quickly pivoted, launching into an explanation of their current business opportunity, something involving health supplements with vague descriptions and implausible profit projections. We're just looking for a few initial investors to help with startup costs, she concluded, her smile bright and plastic. It's going to be huge, Morgan. Ground floor opportunity. After dinner, my father suggested a tour of the house. I agreed, watching as he paid particular attention to Grandpa's study, his eyes lingering on spaces where I'd already removed valuable items. Where's Dad's coin collection? He asked abruptly. He was always going on about those rare coins. In a secure location, I replied truthfully, having moved them to a safety deposit box the week after Grandpa died. He nodded, disappointment poorly concealed. Smart. Those things are worth a fortune. When we returned to the living room, my mother began rewriting history, painting their abandonment as a noble sacrifice. We left you with William and Dorothy to give you advantages we couldn't provide, she insisted, reaching for my hand across the coffee table. It broke our hearts, but we always knew you'd have the best of everything with them. Yes, I said evenly. They gave me everything. The hints about money became less subtle as the evening progressed. My father mentioned his temporary cash flow issues. My mother talked about medical bills from unspecified procedures. Devin stayed mostly quiet, watching the performance with an expression I couldn't quite read. As they prepared to leave, my mother delivered what was clearly their planned approach. We've taken rooms at the Marriott downtown, but we're thinking of staying in Philadelphia more permanently. To be close to you, of course. We have so much lost time to make up for. How long are you planning to stay? I asked. Well, that depends, my father interjected. We're exploring some local opportunities. Maybe you'd like to hear more about them? Just you and me, some father-daughter time. Tomorrow, maybe? I agreed to meet him for lunch, more curious about their endgame than interested in actual reconnect ion. After they left, I sat in Grandma's favorite armchair, processing everything. Their timing, their sudden interest, their barely-veiled financial questions, it all confirmed what the private investigator had found. They weren't here for me. They were here for the inheritance. But they had no idea it was already beyond their reach. The next morning, before meeting my father for lunch, I called Richard Brennan. He listened to my account of the previous evening with growing concern. "This confirms what we suspected," he said carefully. "Your father actually contacted our office last week, asking about the status of William's estate. We provided no information, of course, but the fact that they showed up immediately afterward tells us everything we need to know." "Do they know about the trust?" I asked. "No, that information isn't public record. The will is, however, which would show you as sole beneficiary. They probably assume you have direct access to everything." Richard suggested hiring a private investigator to dig deeper into my parents' recent activities. The expanded report came back that afternoon, and it made my blood run cold. My parents had been tracking obituaries across multiple states, specifically targeting wealthy individuals without many heirs. There were records of them approaching grieving families, claiming distant connections, threatening legal action unless they received settlements. In 3 cases, families had paid them off rather than face prolonged court battles. Most disturbingly, the investigator found evidence that Devin had been working with them for at least 18 months, helping research potential targets and providing a more sympathetic face to their schemes. The abandoned child angle played well with juries, apparently. Armed with this knowledge, I maintained superficial contact over the next week. I met my father for lunch and deflected his increasingly direct questions about bank accounts. I went shopping with my mother and declined her suggestions to put purchases on your card, sweetie. I met Devin for coffee and watched him play the concerned brother while probing for financial details. Their frustration grew visibly as days passed without accessing the money they believed was there. My mother's cheerful facade began cracking, revealing the unstable woman I vaguely remembered from childhood. My father's inquiries became less subtle, directly asking about investment portfolios. Devin's approach was smoother but equally transparent. He suggested joint business ventures and family investment funds. The situation exploded on Tuesday afternoon when I came home early from a meeting with Richard to find my parents in Grandpa's study, going through his desk. My mother was photographing documents with her phone while my father pried at the locked bottom drawer with a letter opener. They both froze when they saw me standing in the doorway. "Morgan." My mother's trembling smile was grotesque. "We were just looking for those photo albums you mentioned. The ones from when you were little." The photo albums were in the living room bookcase, exactly where I'd shown them on their first visit. In that moment, any lingering doubt about their intentions evaporated completely. These weren't parents trying to reconnect. They were con artists targeting what they thought was an easy mark, the abandoned daughter, presumably desperate enough for family that she'd be easy to manipulate. They had fundamentally misjudged what my grandparents had given me beyond money, strength, discernment, and a clear understanding of what real family actually meant. "That's not what you're looking for," I said calmly, stepping into the study. My father straightened quickly, sliding the letter opener aside like he hadn't just been trying to break into a locked drawer. "We were just—" "I know exactly what you were doing," I interrupted. I closed the drawer they'd been searching. "Let's stop pretending. Why are you really here?" My mother's face underwent a remarkable transformation. The artificial warmth drained away, replaced by calculation, then a different strategy entirely. "Wounded maternal love. How can you even ask that?" Her voice quivered, tears welling up that looked almost genuine. "We're here because you're our daughter. We've missed so much." 20 years, I stated flatly. "You missed 20 years by choice. And now you show up exactly 4 weeks after Grandpa's obituary ran in the papers." My father abandoned pretense faster than my mother. "Look, Morgan, families are complicated. We made mistakes, sure, but blood is blood. Whatever issues we had with my parents shouldn't affect our relationship with you. You abandoned me when I was 8 years old. We left you with loving grandparents in a mansion," he countered, an edge entering his voice. "Some kids would call that lucky." Devin appeared in the doorway, drawn by our raised voices. "What's going on?" "I caught them searching Grandpa's desk," I explained, not taking my eyes off my parents. "Looking for financial information." Devin hesitated, glancing between us before attempting a reconciliatory tone. "Morgan, I'm sure they were just curious. This is an adjustment for everyone." "Stop it, Devin," I said tiredly. The investigator found your name on the lawsuits too. I know you've been working with them. His expression hardened instantly, the mask of concerned brother discarded. You hired an investigator? To spy on your own family? My real family raised me, I replied. They taught me to recognize a con when I see one. My father decided to try aggression, moving closer in a way meant to be intimidating. Listen here. Whatever William left should rightfully include a portion for me. I was his son. The son who never visited during his final illness. Who didn't come to his wife's funeral. Who abandoned his own daughter on his doorstep. Legal obligation works both ways, he continued as if I hadn't spoken. Parents have obligations to children, but adult children have obligations to aging parents too. That's not how inheritance law works, I corrected, grateful for the legal research I'd done. And even if it were, you terminated any moral claim when you disappeared from my life. My mother abandoned her tears, switching to cold anger. We're not leaving without what we're owed. William's estate must be worth millions. You can't possibly need all of it. It's not about need, I said. It's about respecting Grandpa's wishes. He specifically structured things the way he did for reasons you're proving right now. They poisoned you against us, my father spat. They never spoke badly about you, I said truthfully. They didn't need to. Your absence said everything. Devin stepped further into the room, his expression calculating. Be reasonable, Morgan. We're talking about sharing, not taking everything. A family partnership. What exactly have you done to earn a partnership? I asked him directly. You left too, Devin. And then you helped them target other families. I saw the records. The silence that followed was telling. My father recovered first, his strategy shifting to intimidation. He stepped closer, using his height advantage. You listen to me. We can do this easy or we can do this hard. The easy way is you share what William left. The hard way involves lawyers and court battles and dragging your grandparents' names through very public mud. What exactly are you threatening? I asked, though I knew. William wasn't exactly sharp toward the end, was he? My father said. All that grief after losing Dorothy, his age. Wouldn't be hard to argue he wasn't competent when he made that will. Or that you, living in his house, taking care of him, might have influenced his decisions. The threat was clear and deeply painful. The people who'd abandoned me were now threatening to claim I'd manipulated the people who actually raised me. You'd commit perjury? I asked. We'd tell the truth as we see it, my mother interjected smoothly. Memory is subjective, especially about family dynamics. This could get very messy and expensive, Morgan. Is that really how you want to honor William and Dorothy? With a public legal battle? I looked at these three people, technically my closest blood relations, and felt nothing but distant pity. They had no idea their threats were empty. The inheritance was already secured in a trust specifically designed to withstand exactly these kinds of challenges. But more importantly, they'd fundamentally misjudged me. They assumed my desire for family would make me vulnerable to manipulation. They were very wrong. I think it's time for you to leave, I said quietly. My father's expression darkened. We're not going anywhere until... Your share is nothing, I interrupted firmly. That was Grandpa's decision, not mine. You ungrateful, he stepped toward me aggressively, hand raised. Don't, I warned, stepping back and pulling out my phone. The security system is recording everything, and I won't hesitate to call the police. He hesitated, visibly calculating. My mother grabbed his arm, her eyes darting to the camera in the corner they hadn't noticed. Raymond, don't. It's not worth it. She turned to me, composure recovered but with visible hatred now. This isn't over, Morgan. Family has rights. You forfeited those rights 20 years ago, I replied. Now please leave before I have you removed. We're staying at a hotel we can barely afford, Devin protested. You're going to just throw us out. That sounds like poor financial planning, I said, echoing one of Grandpa's favorite phrases. Not my problem. When they still didn't move, I opened my phone and started dialing the security service. That finally motivated them. We'll see you in court, my father snarled as they headed for the door. You think you've won, but this is just beginning, my mother added. After they left, I sank onto the front steps of my grandparents' house, my house now, and let myself feel everything I'd been holding back. The family I'd once longed for had revealed themselves as predators, not protectors. But beneath the pain was unexpected relief. The confrontation had freed me from any lingering fantasies about reconciliation. I could finally let go of the 8-year-old who'd waited by the window for parents who were never coming back. As Grandpa had written in his letter, my true inheritance wasn't money. It was the strength and discernment to protect myself. And today, I'd honored that legacy. True to their threat, my parents filed a lawsuit the following week. The legal documents alleged everything they'd threatened, that Grandpa had been mentally incompetent when making his will, that I'd exerted undue influence over a vulnerable elderly man, and that the estate should be divided according to natural family succession, which meant they wanted half of everything. Richard Brennan wasn't surprised when I brought him the court summons. We anticipated this, he reminded me, reviewing the documents with a calm that I didn't feel. The trust structure will make their case extremely difficult, but we need to prepare for an unpleasant process. He assembled a legal team specializing in estate litigation. The initial consultation was sobering. They're asking for 50% of the estate, the lead attorney, Patricia Reynolds, explained. She was a sharp woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and penetrating eyes. Their filing includes about 30 different allegations, but the core argument is that your grandfather wasn't of sound mind when he excluded his only son. He was completely lucid, I said firmly. We discussed his estate planning explicitly. He knew exactly what he was doing. We'll need to prove that, Patricia cautioned. Medical records, witness testimony, documentation of his decision-making capacity. Meanwhile, they'll try to paint you as manipulative, someone who isolated him from his loving family. The irony was almost too much. The people who'd abandoned me were now claiming I'd isolated the people who saved me. Discovery began, requiring me to provide volumes of documentation about my grandparents, their finances, and my relationship with them. I spent days sorting through files, gathering evidence of Grandpa's mental clarity and the consistent estrangement between him and my father. My parents' legal team demanded access to medical records, financial statements, and personal correspondence. Each request felt invasive, a violation of my grandparents' privacy even after death. Patricia assured me we were providing only what was legally required, but the process still left me feeling exposed. The stress began affecting everything. I had nightmares about my childhood, fragments of memories I'd thought I'd processed. The waiting, the broken promises, Devin's hand slipping from mine as he chose to leave. I'd wake up at 3 a.m, heart racing, unable to fall back asleep. Richard suggested I see a therapist, and I started sessions with Dr. Amanda Foster, who specialized in family trauma and complicated grief. Our twice-weekly meetings became my anchor. What you're experiencing is layered grief, Dr. Foster explained during one session. You're mourning your grandparents while simultaneously dealing with renewed betrayal by your parents and brother. That's an enormous emotional burden. She taught me coping strategies, meditation, journaling, setting boundaries around when I'd engage with legal matters. Don't check emails from your attorney after 7 p.m., she advised. Your brain needs rest from the conflict. Through therapy, I began understanding that my worth wasn't connected to my parents' approval or even their acknowledgement. Their behavior reflects their own character deficits, Dr. Foster pointed out, not your value as a person. Meanwhile, the legal process ground forward with agonizing slowness. Depositions were scheduled, starting with mine. 7 grueling hours, I answered questions designed to make me appear calculating and manipulative. My parents' attorney, a slick man named Gerald Hutchins, tried repeatedly to trip me up about conversations with Grandpa. Isn't it true, Ms. Parker, that you resented your father's potential claim to your grandparents' estate? He asked with fake sympathy. I never thought of it as anyone's claim, I replied honestly. My grandparents earned their money. They had the right to decide what happened to it. But you discussed your father with them, didn't you? Reminded them of his absence. I didn't need to remind them. They lived through it. My parents' depositions were worse to sit through. I watched via video link as they constructed elaborate fiction about attempted reconciliation supposedly thwarted by my grandparents. We called constantly, my mother claimed tearfully. We sent letters. But William and Dorothy intercepted everything. They turned Morgan against us. This was completely false. I had the phone records Grandpa had kept, showing exactly 3 calls in 20 years, all from my parents asking for money. "We just wanted to be part of Morgan's life again," my father said, his performance surprisingly convincing. "But William and Dorothy poisoned her against us. And now she's continuing their campaign to exclude us." Devin's testimony was perhaps the most painful. He described our childhood in terms I barely recognized, painting himself as a victim forced out by my grandparents' preference for me. "They always favored Morgan," he claimed. "They made it clear there wasn't room for both of us. I had to leave." This was a complete rewrite of history. My grandparents had begged him to stay, even offering to convert the garage apartment into his own space for independence. But Devin's false testimony revealed how thoroughly he'd rationalized his choices. The case took an unexpected turn when our legal team discovered something I hadn't known existed: detailed journals in Grandpa's study that documented 20 years of attempted contact with my father. He'd kept meticulous records, dates of unanswered calls, copies of returned letters marked return to sender, notes about the rare communications from my father that always involved requests for money. One entry from when I was 16 read, "Raymond called today. No questions about Morgan's well-being, her grades, her life. Just needed $8,000 for a business opportunity." When I refused, he said I owed him for taking his daughter, as if Morgan were property to be traded rather than the child he abandoned. "I fear what might happen if she ever falls under his influence again." These journals became central to our case, providing contemporaneous documentation of my father's absence and financial motivations. Combined with the private investigators' findings about my parents' pattern of targeting wealthy estates, they painted a devastating picture. Patricia also brought in expert witnesses, 3 different doctors who'd evaluated Grandpa in his final months, all confirming his mental competence. Our financial experts detailed the careful planning that had gone into the estate structure, showing that the trust wasn't a hasty decision but part of a long-term strategy. Most powerful, though, were testimonies from neutral third parties. Former neighbors who described the neglect Devin and I had experienced before going to live with our grandparents. Teachers from my elementary school who documented concerns they'd reported to social services. These people had no stake in the outcome, they were simply telling the truth about what they'd witnessed. 4 months after the lawsuit began, we had our day in court for final arguments. My parents' attorney emphasized family obligation and natural succession, arguing that excluding a child violated fundamental principles of inheritance. Patricia focused on Grandpa's clear intentions, his documented mental competence, and my parents' transparent financial predation. She presented the journals, the investigation findings, the expert testimonies, building an overwhelming case that the will reflected exactly what Grandpa wanted. The judge's ruling came 3 weeks later. She dismissed my parents' claims entirely, upholding both Grandpa's will and the trust arrangements as valid expressions of his wishes. In her written opinion, she was surprisingly direct. "The evidence demonstrates that the plaintiffs abandoned their daughter at age 8 and maintained virtually no contact for 20 years. Their sudden reappearance following the decedent's death, combined with their documented pattern of targeting wealthy estates, reveals transparent financial motivation rather than legitimate family concern. The court finds no basis to overturn the decedent's clearly expressed testamentary wishes." Outside the courthouse, my father made one final attempt. His earlier aggression had given way to something more desperate. "Morgan, please," he said, his voice low and urgent. "We're still your parents. Everyone makes mistakes. Just help us get back on our feet. Even just a couple $100,000 would change everything for us." I looked at him, really looked at the man who'd contributed half my DNA but nothing to my character or happiness, and felt the final weight lift from my shoulders. "I have no obligation to finance the lives of people who chose not to be part of mine," I said quietly. The court agreed. "This is finished." As I walked away, I heard my mother call out, "Blood is thicker than water, Morgan." I didn't turn back, but I thought of something Grandma had once told me: the full saying is the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. It means the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born into. My grandparents had chosen me, and I had chosen them back. That bond was my true inheritance, far more valuable than any dollar amount. The legal victory marked a turning point. With the threat resolved, I could finally focus on honoring my grandparents' legacy rather than defending it. I established the William and Dorothy Parker Memorial Foundation, dedicating a portion of the estate to supporting children being raised by grandparents or other relatives due to parental absence, kids like me. The foundation would provide college scholarships, counseling services, and mentorship programs. My therapy with Dr. Foster continued, helping me process the complex emotions the lawsuit had stirred up. Healing isn't linear, she reminded me when I had setbacks. Some days will be harder than others. But you're building resilience with each challenge you face. Gradually, I reconnected with life beyond the legal battle. I started my job at the financial advisory firm, applying the principles Grandpa had taught me. I made friends who knew me as Morgan the analyst, not Morgan the abandoned daughter or contested heir. I finally felt ready to truly live in the Princeton house, making small changes to make it mine while preserving what my grandparents had created. I replanted Grandma's rose garden, learning through trial and error since I didn't have her green thumb. I converted Grandpa's study into a home office where I could carry forward his financial wisdom. 1 year after the lawsuit ended, I stood at Rutgers Community College to announce the first Parker Foundation Scholars, 4 students raised by grandparents or other relatives who would receive full support to complete their degrees. My grandparents believed education was the most powerful tool for transforming lives, I told the small gathering of press and community members. They transformed mine not just through financial support, but through the values they instilled and the love they provided when others wouldn't. This foundation honors that legacy. The public commitment felt like the perfect counterpoint to the lawsuit scrutiny. Instead of defending my grandparents' memory in court, I was now honoring it through positive action. In private, my healing continued. Dr. Foster helped me understand that forgiveness didn't require reconciliation. Forgiveness is something you do for yourself, she explained during one session. It's releasing the power that anger has over you. It doesn't mean allowing harmful people back into your life. This distinction freed me from guilt about maintaining boundaries. I could wish my parents well while recognizing that contact would likely lead to more manipulation. I occasionally heard updates about them through mutual acquaintances. They continued their pattern of questionable ventures, moving from city to city as opportunities or legal issues dictated. Devin had apparently cut ties with them about 8 months after the failed lawsuit, pursuing what seemed like a more legitimate path in commercial real estate in Boston. 2 years after the court case, I received a letter from Devin. Unlike our parents' communications, his seemed genuinely reflective. "I've spent years blaming everyone else for my choices," he wrote. "Blaming mom and dad for being terrible parents, blaming grandma and grandpa for being too good to me, blaming you for being young enough to accept their love when I was too damaged to trust it. I'm trying to take responsibility now. What I said in that deposition wasn't true. I knew it wasn't true when I said it. I'm sorry." I appreciated his honesty but remained cautious. One letter couldn't erase decades of choices or the painful lies he'd told under oath. I responded briefly, acknowledging his apology without making promises about future contact. Trust, once broken so completely, couldn't be quickly rebuilt. Meanwhile, I built a life that balanced honoring my grandparents' legacy with establishing my own identity. The investment skills Grandpa taught me served me well in my career, where I specialized in helping clients build ethical, sustainable portfolios that aligned with their values. I approached finance with his philosophy: money was a tool for security and helping others, not an end in itself. I volunteered with the foundation, mentoring scholarship recipients and sharing my story when it might help someone else feel less alone. I renovated parts of the house while preserving its heart. Grandma's china still came out for special occasions. Grandpa's coin collection, now in a proper display case, reminded me of Sunday mornings spent learning about history and value. These connections to their daily lives comforted me as much as the larger legacy projects. New relationships entered my life slowly as I learned to balance caution with openness. Colleagues became friends. Neighbors shared gardening tips over the fence. And eventually, I met James, a kind urban planner I encountered at a community development meeting. "Your experiences made you careful about trust," James observed after I finally shared my full family history with him, "but they didn't make you cold. That's remarkable." His observation helped me see what my grandparents had accomplished. Despite the abandonment I'd experienced, they'd raised me to believe in genuine connection, to be discerning but not disconnected. 3 years after Grandpa's death, I expanded the foundation to include a mentoring program for teenagers in kinship care. I occasionally spoke to these groups, sharing my story in ways I hoped might help. "Family isn't just about biology," I would tell them. "It's about who shows up, who stays, who makes you feel safe and valued. Those are your real family members, regardless of their legal relationship to you." Seeing these young people, many with stories far harder than mine, find strength and community reminded me of Grandma's wisdom: pain that's transformed can become purpose. My grandparents had transformed their pain at their son's choices into purposeful love for me. Now I was transforming my experiences into support for others walking similar paths. This ongoing circle felt like the truest way to honor what they'd given me. The $3 million estate had been the catalyst for my parents' return and the legal battle that followed. But its true value lay in what it represented: my grandparents' life work, their careful planning, their desire to provide security for the granddaughter they'd raised as their own. By protecting some for future security while using other portions to help others, I was fulfilling their intentions more completely than any legal document could express. As I approach my 30th birthday, I recognize that my story continues to evolve. The abandoned 8-year-old, the beloved granddaughter, the contested heir, the foundation director. These are all chapters in an ongoing narrative. What remains constant are the values my grandparents instilled: integrity, compassion, discernment, and the courage to protect what matters. The trust that initially protected the estate from my parents' claims became a symbol of something deeper: the boundary between allowing people into your heart and allowing them to exploit your vulnerability. I've learned these boundaries aren't selfish. They're essential for meaningful connection. If you've ever had to protect yourself from family who should have protected you, know that you're not alone. Setting boundaries isn't about revenge or bitterness, it's about creating space for genuine relationships to flourish. The family we're born into may shape our beginnings, but the family we choose, and who chooses us, shapes our character and our future. Has someone in your life stepped up when others stepped away? I'd love to hear about the people who became your true family. Leave a comment below about your experience. Like this video if Morgan's story resonated with you, and subscribe for more stories about finding strength when family lets you down. Share this with someone who might need to hear that family is defined by love and loyalty, not just shared DNA. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, your worth isn't determined by the people who left. It's proven by the courage it takes to remain true to yourself despite that abandonment, and to recognize real love when it finally shows up. Because sometimes the family you find is the family you were always meant to have.